Steve, it's so great to have you here to discuss this wonderful book. I dove into it and I couldn't put it down. Pilgrimage to the Museum.
Thank you, Monse.
Let's get started just about your personal journey coming back into the church. A lot of people see these books and they think this person must be, a zealot, really into the church all of his life and well-formed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes the book attractive to people is it's written by a broken vessel, I grew up as an altar boy, very Catholic family, but by the time I got finished with college at Princeton, I was at best an indifferent agnostic. And my journey to the faith started to come back slowly through marrying my beautiful bride, who's a devout Catholic. The kids get raised. But about 25 years ago, I had a near-death experience, and a priest came up to give me last rites and my first confession in 25 years. And when we got done with that, he said, Steve, you're a guy with a lot of talents, and your big problem right now is that you've been using them for yourself and not for God.
Wow.
And I resolved if I survived, I was going to turn my talents and use them for God. And that led to our mission work on the streets of New York, which a lot of folks know about now. And this second mission, because I had, a lot of background in art history, and we loved taking people through the Met. So we just started doing that years ago. But at some point, and it's described at the very beginning of the missionary of the Pilgrimage Museum, there's this point where I have this epiphany that looking at art through the lens of purely classical art historians, which kind of sanitize and make it scientific, and it's kind of sanitize the paintings, is a good place to start. But you need to have God in the conversation. And we decided to take a look at art from the perspective of God being there, the image of beauty that he places in our soul, the image of himself. And we just redid the entire tour, and it became a pilgrimage, starting from ancient Egypt right up through the moderns.
It's interesting that you chose art that isn't necessarily religious. That's something that some people have commented about the reality of, well, if you want to talk about religion and art, there's a lot of religious art we can talk about.
Yeah.
Why choose things that aren't codified as religious?
I think maybe partly is sort of coming from my own background and realizing that we're all seeking God even when we don't realize we're seeking God. And I always ask the pilgrims at the start of the tour, if you could just work with me on this. And I quote from Ecclesiastes how, I've placed the timeless into their hearts such that they'll never know the works that I have done. And just work with me on this. And at first they're a little suspicious, but as you start to go through and you see, my goodness, they were seeking God. And then you start to see these themes occur and recur over thousands of years with different artists in different periods of time and different styles of working art. You begin to say, wait a second here, there's something greater at work. In some ways, the conclusion of the whole exercise for me is when, written up in the epilogue, and I ask myself, is this man seeking God, or is it God seeking us in some ways, right, through art?
Absolutely. Have you found that secularization, a lack of biblical literacy, but also a lack of awareness and knowledge of history gets in the way, that you're really kind of teaching things as you go and people are learning things that they hadn't discovered before or encountered before? Yeah,
that's sort of our formula you're picking up. It's not formulaic per se, but we really do think it's important to put the story in the context of the time. What was going on at that moment in time, and what was influencing the artist? Today we like to place what's going on now back in time, right? That's not how to look at art in my mind. You've got to start understanding where it's from, and then the religious background or the spiritual background is very, very important. If you start to understand spirituality, most of my pilgrims, I always tell them, when we get through with this, you're at least going to be able to identify periods of time. Because of the spirituality, you can see the spirituality coming out through the art, whether it's Egypt or Greece or Rome or the so-called Middle and Dark Ages. We call them the Light Ages.
Yes.
You can see the spirituality of that time and people's understanding of the relationship with God changing over that period. So I think it's really very, very important to understanding the art, to put yourself in the context.
And the time period. Do you think that there is one nugget, one story, one reaction that you've had from these tours that really kind of stands out for you? Whether it's about history or maybe a faith journey or someone who saw something or reacted in a way you just didn't expect?
Well, almost every night when we go, we unpack the tour over dinner. And we have little prayer cards. We go around and ask people their favorite painting. And what's remarkable to me is how so many different paintings get chosen. And so some people are touched in a way you wouldn't have thought, and they often will be crying, actually, over dinner because of the impact on them. But everyone's impacted differently. There's a broad variety of art in the pilgrimage, and people will always find their favorite one, in the storyline.
I found a favorite one in the pilgrimage through the book. I can't wait to go to the museum at some point and really live it. But for me, it was the journey that we take with Bathsheba, where you talk about the relationship between the artist and God and where he was in his faith journey and how that context is almost so much more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the Toilet of Bathsheba is the painting you're referencing, Monse, and actually the book starts there because that's where I had this sort of epiphany. And in some ways, an art historian will tell you, well, this is a painting from Rembrandt's Oriental period. He was very interested in things of the Far East. It's one of his only nudes, and this is this beautiful image of Bathsheba. And as I'm standing there looking at it, listening to the docent, I'm thinking, well, everything she's saying is absolutely accurate, and in ways absolutely wrong, because it's not a painting about Bathsheba at all. It's a painting about David, and in some ways, it's a painting about Rembrandt himself, and in a deeper level, it's a painting about each of us, right? It's about the slippery slope of sin. And you see this image of Bathsheba with darkness all around her, and the light is shining on her, right? So that's sort of, the devil has a way of focusing us on the wrong thing, if you will. And what we're looking at in that image is not actually Bathsheba. It's the image of Bathsheba. In Rembrandt's mind, or let's say in David's mind, as he up in the dark tower up there looks on and begins to imagine, what a night with her might be like. And it's what a priest friend of mine always says, Steve, the first look's not your fault. The second look is your fault. And this is like the third look. And, then, that's the beginning of the slippery slope for David, right? He invites her over. They have an affair. Then she gets pregnant. They've committed adultery. He tries to cover it up, the big lie, brings the husband back from the field of battle. He refuses to sleep with his wife because the nation's at war and shouldn't even be in Jerusalem at this point. Like, why were you there, David? And then, of course, David famously has the husband executed so that no one knows that he didn't sleep with his wife and impregnate Bathsheba, with Solomon, by the way. So in some ways it is, it's the slippery slope of sin. Rembrandt at that time is himself having an affair with his housekeeper. And there's this garter on Bathsheba's calf, garter mark, which the art historians at the time, or the community at the time, and art historians later always talk about, what was he doing with this garter? I always felt it was Rembrandt's way of saying, that's my housekeeper there.
It's about me.
This is a modern woman. This is not Bathsheba at all. And I think I think of the Toilet of Bathsheba as Rembrandt's Psalm 51. David famously writes Psalm 51. It's one of the great penitential psalms. It's often been given to me as a penance.
Create a clean heart.
Yeah, and it's a great penitential psalm, but in a way I think the painting of it becomes Rembrandt's Psalm 51.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful reflection. And do you think that part of the inspiration for this is the fact that the church has used beauty as a reflection of truth in the past, and there's a tradition of it within the church?
Well, that's, I think, what a lot of the popes were after, and the churches as they build them is like, and there's this wonderful stop on the tour, on the pilgrimage, inside of a church, actually, and we're looking at a stained glass window, right, of the Abbey Saint-Germain, and it's a story about St. Vincent of Saragossa, a great layperson who is wearing a halo. You know, the deacon, he's the deacon, right, but he has a halo because he ends up sacrificing himself for the church. But, you know, I always felt like the churches were built to show the miracle of the Mass, right? I mean, it's heaven on earth inside of a church. This is where God comes to us through the Eucharist. And all the beauty of the church, of the churches and the paintings, were designed to help us understand that this is God. This is God's beauty. I mean, the Renaissance painters were trying to paint things through the eyes of God. That's why they're so beautiful and so perfect.
You have another book, Missionary on Wall Street, that talks about how your encounter with people in need really shaped your faith journey and your life. And then now you're choosing to encounter a different kind of person who has a different kind of need. It's not a physical need, it's an internal spiritual need.
Yeah.
Do you see those differences in your own journey to serve other people through the intellectual rather than the physical?
Yeah, well, Mother Teresa, you know, when she came here famously said, you know, the problem in this country is not physical poverty, it's spiritual poverty. And actually, even on the streets of New York and Soho, our mission, although we do certainly get folks that are impoverished or whatever, but we're in the most affluent neighborhood of the city. So it's actually going after the spiritually impoverished. But, you know, if you read The Missionary of Wall Street, you'll see that it's about all these wonderful God instances of people in need spiritually, somehow finding their way to just the right missionary who could get them back to the church. And so it's a transformation of hundreds of thousands of people, well, I mean, at least reflected on. But what it's really about, in a way, and I think it's the same way with the pilgrimage, it's when we give ourselves over to the Lord and do what he asks. And I'm a reluctant doer, you know. Whenever I get the phone call, my first reaction is, got to be a wrong number. You know, I'm not the right guy for this. I'm not holy enough. You know, you need a saint for this job. But sooner or later, he gets me to do it. And what it is, when we cooperate with the Lord, isn't it true that it always works out? I always say to people, like, think about times you've been given the call and you said no. And how did that work out for you? And then when you said yes, how did that work out for you?
That's right.
And in the missionary, one of the arcs of the story is this anonymous missionary. It's the author. And he starts out saying, absolutely no way, not going to do this. And at the end of the book, it's Holy Thursday, 6:45. All the priests have left the confessionals to vest for the Mass of the Lord's Supper, the one Mass of the year. All the missionaries have been sent into the church. The signs are down, and it's starting to rain. And this hardened Wall Street guy who had said no when it all started hears a voice saying, Steve, stay on this corner. It makes no sense, completely illogical. And he does without hesitating. And then a little miracle happens that changes someone's life, you know. And the Lord transforms us, I think, in the process of doing his will. That's the beauty of any of these things. I mean, the pilgrimage, every night Evelyn and I do it, we're transformed by it. I know a lot of folks are as well, but the process of taking people to the museum and seeing their reaction and ourselves seeing something almost every night, she and I will see something in a painting that we never saw before.
It's a gift to you as well as other people.
It is.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I hope that everyone will not only read this, but figure out how to get on this tour with you.
Thank you, Monse.